Well, you have to treat yourself like you matter, because if you don't, then you don't take care of yourself, and you become vengeful and cruel, and you take it out on people around you, and you're not a positive force. None of that's good. So you suffer more, and so does everyone around you. And there's a malevolence that enters into it. None of that's good. So that's what happens if you don't treat yourself like you matter. And then, well, what happens if you don't treat other people like they matter? Well, you lie to them, you cheat them, you steal, you enter into impulsive relationships with them. They can't trust you. That doesn't go anywhere. They don't like you. You end up alone at best, and maybe like incarcerated at worst. Like, that doesn't work. And so you watch the people around you who thrive, regardless of what they say. They act out the proposition that everyone matters. And then you have a functional society. And I think, okay, well, if when you act out the proposition that everyone matters, you have a functional society, maybe that's evidence that that proposition is true. I started to pay very careful attention to what I was saying. I don't know if that happened voluntarily or involuntarily, but I could feel a sort of split developing in my psyche. And let's say the old me that was talking a lot, and that liked to argue, and that liked ideas. And there was another part that was watching that part, like just with its eyes open and neutrally judging. And the part that was neutrally judging was watching the part that was talking and going, that isn't your idea. You don't really believe that. You don't really know what you're talking about. That isn't true. And I thought, that's really interesting. So now and that was happening to like 95% of what I was saying. And so then I didn't really know what to do. I thought, okay, this is strange. So maybe I've fragmented, and that's just not a good thing at all. I mean, so then I had this weird conundrum. It was like, well, which of these two things are me? Is it the part that's listening and saying, no, that's rubbish. That's a lie. You're doing that to impress people. You're just trying to win the argument, you know. And then what I tried to do, what I learned to do, I think, was to stop saying things that made me weak. And now I mean, I'm still trying to do that, because I'm always feeling when I talk whether or not the words that I'm saying are either making me align or making me come apart. But anyways, I decided that I would start practicing not saying things that would make me weak. And what happened was that I had to stop saying almost everything that I was saying. I would say 95% of it. It's a hell of a shock to wake up and realize that you're mostly dead wood. It's a shock, you know, and you might think, well, do you really want all of that to burn off? It's like, well, there's nothing left but a little husk, 5% of you. It's like, well, if that 5% is solid, then maybe that's exactly what you want to have happen. You really are your only comparison group, especially as you get older, because your life is so idiosyncratic and peculiar. I mean, look, you have to care what other people think. It's stupid to think otherwise, because you have to be social and you have to be aware of what other people are doing and all of that. So this isn't psychopathic individuality, but it is genuinely true that no one has your set of opportunities and limitation. And so the comparison just isn't real. It can't be sufficiently multidimensional. Many people who are very, very rich. And you can look at their lives, and they have these huge houses and material plenty, and they're shielded from many catastrophes that would hit someone without those resources harder. Their lives are still full of exactly the same troubles that characterize human life in general. And so you compare yourself on one dimension. You don't see, well, the person's worked 80 hours a week for 40 years and it's blown all his relationships out of the water. It's like, yes, he's rich, but he's also old now. And one of the best predictors of wealth is age. You know, really, do you want to be young and poor or old and rich? It's like, I'd pick young and poor, because you can't buy youth. And that's something that's worth considering. But you don't know what burdens the people you're jealous of are carrying. So leave it be. It's not helpful to you to be envious. I stopped wasting time. That helped a lot. I stopped drinking. I stopped going to bars. Where I cut corners was more with social life outside my family. So I spent a lot of time with my wife, and I spent a lot of time with my kids, and I spent a lot of time on my career. And so you have to make choices. And I think those were reasonable choices. I'm not displeased with them. Don't abandon your friendships, but you can certainly look at where you're wasting time, and so if you just stop wasting time, you can do a tremendous amount, especially if you also try to maximize efficiency. And I always found that incredibly motivating. You know, a motivating game. how much can I do in the least amount of time possible? But if you're wired that way, that's a great meta strategy. Become efficient. I always ask my graduate students when they were designing experiments, they'd come with a proposal. I'd say to them, is there any way you could do this 10 times faster? What would you have to cut? What would you have to change to do this 10 times faster? And you can learn to do that. I also learned to force the task to fit the time. There's this dictum, work expands to fill the time allowed for its completion. Well, there's a corollary to that, which is work becomes more efficient in proportion to the restrictions of time placed upon it. So if you say, well, this could take me 2 weeks, but I'm going to do the best job I could in 1 day, you'd be amazed. You can get 90% of the way or 95% of the way or sometimes even farther in that day. So that's another way of becoming efficient. If you only have 10 minutes to do something that should maybe take you 2 hours, maybe you can figure out how to do it in 10 minutes. You can get dreadfully efficient.
Here's how you know if someone's your friend. A, you can tell them bad news and they'll listen. They won't tell you why, you're stupid and why that bad thing happened to you and how something worse happened to them once and, derail the whole conversation. You can actually tell them bad news and they'll listen. So that's a good thing. And then this is a weirder thing. You can tell them good news and they'll help you celebrate. And that's a really good way of deciding who you should have around you. Because if you have someone around you, something good happens to you and you're kind of afraid to even admit it because, God, something good happened to you. It's like, you let that be known and it'll certainly be taken away. So, you come out and you sort of tell someone half-heartedly that something good happened to you and they give you a whack and then talk about, the great thing that happened to them 3 years ago. Or worse, the great thing that happened to someone that they knew 3 years ago. It's like, go away from that person. They're not helpful to you and they're not helpful to themselves either. And so you want to surround yourself, you got to think about this. You got to surround yourself with people who want the best for the best part of you. You can hang around with weasels and losers that are trying to pull you down to justify the fact that they're spiraling downhill as well. And the upside of that is you don't have to have any responsibility and you can all whine about how wretched life is, so that's pretty attractive. But I would say it's also a bad medium to long-term plan. And so it's acceptable and desirable to try to surround yourself with people who are facilitating your development. And you might say, well, I've got people around, I know them well, they're not doing that well and they don't fit into that category. It's like, what's your point? What are you going to do with them exactly? If they'll listen and cooperate with you and move towards a better future, great. If they don't pay any attention and they keep doing the same damn things over and over and they're not going anywhere and it's painful, then maybe the proper thing to do is say, you just have your misery. I'll go off and have my life. And maybe you'll wake up at some point in the future and think that's a better way of being. Because just putting up with it is, well, they call that enabling, right? You put up with that sort of behavior, you're providing tacit consent for it and even tacit approval. It's a bad idea. You have, I would say, both the right and the responsibility to surround yourself with people who are good for the best part of you.
Let's say you don't know what to do. Well, maybe you're high in openness and so you're pulled in all sorts of directions, or maybe you're low in conscientiousness, or you're confused because you're anxious, or you haven't had any direction, you haven't had good mentoring, etc., etc. There's lots of reasons. Well, I would say pick something, a nameable goal, and then try to implement it. And what'll happen is you'll learn a lot by trying to implement it. And one of the things you might learn is what a slightly better goal might be. Because if you try something diligently and you succeed or you fail, you're going to learn from the effort expended in the detailed implementation of the goal. It's going to inform you. It'll also transform you physiologically. You will be slightly different as a consequence of the attempt. And what that'll mean is that the next goal you pick will be a little more suited to you. And so it's this kind of pathway, right? It's like maybe the goal you should be attaining is here, but you don't know that because you're clueless. And so you aim there. Well, it's better than there. And it's not nothing. It's not cessation of movement. And if you're supposed to go there and you go here, but you walk diligently towards it, you're a little closer once you get to here than you were here. And it's this oscillating self-corrective process that leads you to the final star. And you have to be willing to engage in erroneous experimentation to manage that, but it is a self-correcting process. Well, let's try something, and we'll reserve to ourselves the right to alter our trajectory. You won't replace any goal you've set with a goal that's easier. And so you can switch your goal, but it has to be a little harder so that you check yourself against that tendency to withdraw and avoid and be self-deceptive. And that works like a charm. And if you do that with some degree of diligence, your goals will get better and more attainable, and you'll get happier too, because you don't experience happiness except in relationship to a goal. And that's really worth knowing.
I'm homesick for the past instead of accepting the terrifying present. How can I stop mourning the past? There's things in your past that you need to understand more deeply, and that's why they're still calling to you. And there are things in your past that you had, perhaps, that you need to have in the present and the future. And so you could do the past authoring program and write out your past. Asks you to detail the most emotionally significant events that occurred during different epochs or stages of your life. So you have to break your life into a number of stages. I think we recommended 6, but you can break it into as many as you want or as few. And then to detail out the significant positive and negative occurrences, that stand out in your memory from those times. And that'll kind of help put the past to rest, but it also might highlight for you what it is that you're nostalgic for. And then that can help you figure out what to aim for in the future. And so, it sounds like you're rather hopeless about the present and by implication the future. And maybe that's because you don't have a richly enough developed conception of what it could be. So you could go back to your past and find out what it is that you wanted and had, and then you need to make a plan for how you might obtain that in the future.
Assume that the person that you're listening to knows something you don't. And that's a good position to take when you're engaging in a conversation with someone. It's like, look, if you already know enough, more power to you, man. But if you're suffering more than you think is necessary, which is like highly probable, or more than you think is desirable, which basically means if you're suffering more than you think is desirable, that means that you're way more ignorant than you need to be. Right? That's what it means, because maybe you have an illness, you don't know how to cure it. Maybe you're having a fight with someone, you don't know how to get out of it. Maybe you're failing at work and you don't know what to do about it. It's like you're ignorant, and no wonder, because people are ignorant. And so you might think, well, unless everything is just the way you want it to be, then you have something to learn. And then you think, well, maybe the person you're talking to, no matter how uncomfortable you are with their opinions and how bent out of shape you think they are, maybe even how bent out of shape they actually are. There's always the possibility that if you actually engaged in a conversation, you asked them questions and you tried to figure out what they thought, that you'd come away with one crumb of knowledge more than you had when you went into the conversation. And conversations like that are a lot more interesting. Conversation is between people of goodwill who are trying to tell the truth, who are trying to aim at making things better, is unbelievably valuable.
Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Because you can't tell the truth, right? Because who are you to tell the truth? That's a mighty tall order, man. But you can stop saying things that you know are lies. That will change your life if you do that. And it's crucial.
Why would it change their life?
You can't just lie to other people, because what you say becomes you, especially if you practice it, because we build ourselves out of words. And that can be lies in action too. Don't say things you know to be false. That's a good start, man. And it aligns yourself with the truth. And how can that be a bad idea? Imagine that what is true reflects reality, which is sort of the definition of true. How can failing to align yourself with reality work? How is that possibly going to work? Well, you say, well, I can, if I lie, I get away with something. It's like, no, you don't. I tell you, I swear this is true. Imagine that you took a flexible plastic comb, and you bent it backwards, and you say, well, I got away with that. What's going to happen when you let go? It's going to snap back and hit you in the face. And that's life, man. You think the chickens won't come home to roost. It's like, all that means is you're too stupid to see what your lies caused, or too blind or too self-deceptive. You just don't see it. And so you don't get away with anything. Nothing. It's terrifying to actually understand that.
Make a damn schedule and stick to it. Okay, so what's the rule with the schedule? It's not a bloody prison. That's the first thing that people do wrong. They say, well, I don't like to follow a schedule. It's like, well, what kind of schedule are you setting up? Well, I have to do this, then I have to do this, then I have to do this, you know, and then I just go play video games, because who wants to do all these things that I have to do? It's like, wrong. Set the damn schedule up so that you have the day you want. That's the trick. It's like, okay, I've got tomorrow. If I was going to set it up so it was the best possible day I could have, practically speaking, what would it look like? Well, then you schedule that. And obviously there's a bit of responsibility that's going to go along with that, because if you have any sense, one of the things that you're going to insist upon is that at the end of the day, you're not in worse shape than you were than at the beginning of the day, right? Because that's a stupid day. If you have a bunch of those in a row, you just dig, you know, you dig yourself a hole and then you bury yourself in it. It's like, sorry, that's just not a good strategy. It's a bad strategy. So maybe 20% of your day has to be responsibility and obligation, or maybe it's more than that, depending on how far behind you are. But even that, you can ask yourself, okay, well, I've got these responsibilities. I have to schedule the damn things in. What's the right ratio of responsibility to reward? And you can ask yourself that, just like you'd negotiate with someone who is working for you. It's like, okay, you got to work tomorrow. Okay, so I want you to work tomorrow. And you might say, okay, well, what are you going to do for me that makes it likely that I'll work for you? Well, you could ask yourself that, you know. So maybe you do an hour of responsibility and then you play a video game for 15 minutes. I don't know, whatever turns your crank, man. But, you know, you have to negotiate with yourself and not tyrannize yourself. And that's how you make the schedule. It's like, and then you look at the day and you think, well, if I had that day, that'd be good. Great. You know, and you're useless and horrible, so you'll probably only hit it with about 70% accuracy, but that beats the hell out of 0. Right? And if you hit it even with 50% accuracy, another rule is, well, aim for 51% the next week, or 50.5% for God's sake, or because you're going to hit that position where things start to loop back positively and spiral you upward.